On my last video where that guy tried to justify Allah's behavior by appealing to slavery, I got a comment from someone called Half Monty. And originally I just replied flippantly, but I actually kinda like this subject matter and I do have a few things to say on it that I haven't said before, and so I figured I might as well reply in a video. Besides, he seemed upset that I didn't actually argue about the basis of my morality in the video, which really wasn't the point, and I don't think I have to justify my moral opinions in every single video or every single time I make a moral condemnation, let alone explain how I can hold any moral opinions at all as an atheist. When I'm blasting some guy for acting like an anti-human asshole, the very last thing I feel any need to discuss is moral philosophy. But I'll do it now, so here goes.
To be clear, I don't like Islam, I don't want to defend Islam, and I don't agree with the concept of slavery representing a God-human relationship.
Okay, so you have a different moral position from the guy in the video. Okay.
However, this whole video is riddled with moral stances that you then apply to a god. Yep, the old morality versus God argument, and you're falling right into it. You present a fairly well and understood position that it's immoral or inherently bad to start smashing another human, or force us into a pit of fire, burn our skin off, replace it with new skin, and do that over and over and over. Your god is a despicable creature. Based off of what?
Based off of my morality, of course, just like you or anyone else would do it. What do you think, I'm some sort of space alien or weird demon or something? You think my morality works in some totally different way from the morality of the humans?
Most atheists don't agree on an objective and universal moral code, right?
Does anyone, really, ultimately? People say they do, sure, but I don't think they quite understand what they're saying. If you think there's a universal moral code, you're delusional. The video you're commenting on is a good example. The guy I'm responding to believes slavery is so well justified that it can be used to justify any attack by his god against any human for any reason. And on the other hand, I believe slavery is totally unjustified in principle in all places and times, no matter who does it or what justifications they offer. And yet somehow you think the same moral code is held universally? Well, it's clearly not universal. At least one person does not share that moral code, so it's a complete denial of reality to think it's universal. And no, it does not matter if you think there's a god out there with some preferred moral code who'll punish people after they're dead if they don't follow it. First, there's the fact that his morality is not objective just because he's a god. It's just that his subjective moral code happens to be the one backed up with the most amount of power to punish everyone who breaks it. But maybe someone will try to argue that God's morality actually is the one true objective morality of the universe. And okay, fine, I won't argue, because even if that's the case, it does nothing to change the obvious fact that individuals develop their own morality regardless. Even the most deeply religious have to pick and choose from the moral edicts of their holy books, at the very least when they conflict, and they have to interpret their meaning, and then they also develop their own morality further on the side. But even if they pick morality straight out of a literal interpretation of a holy book, that was still individual choice. Their own choice of their own moral code, and their choice happened to be to use the book as a source. And look, I'm not sure if you believe in God, but let's just say you do. You believe in God, and so does the guy in the video, but you've come to radically different moral opinions. The mere fact of believing in God did not force you into whatever God's one true morality might be. There's no mechanism operating in the real world that forces people following any particular religion to adopt identical moral codes to each other, and then never to change them based on their own thoughts and experiences. Devout believers in the tiniest, most fundamentalist church can still have moral disagreements with each other. So whether there's a God or not, whether you're a theist or an atheist, and whether you like it or not, the reality is the same. Humans choose or develop their own morality. Now, just to be sure that I've covered everything here, I'm going to consider other meanings you might have intended with the term universal moral code, which you might have just expressed poorly. So first, a moral code embedded into the nature of the universe itself. Maybe it's there, maybe it isn't, but the fact is this doesn't seem to have any impact on the real world. It's readily obvious that people develop their own morality either way. Some people keep slaves and others try to free them, for example. So if moral laws are embedded in the nature of the universe itself in the same way the laws of physics are, well, people seem to break them without even trying anyway, so they don't seem to do much of anything, and I think we can discount them. Secondly, a moral code which applies to everyone universally. I don't deny the existence of such a thing, and it'd be hard to since mine is one of them. Whether I always succeed or not, my goal is to apply my standards of morality equally to everyone. So yeah, no problem there.
So either this is your personal view and moral code you are then trying to apply to an omniscient God which you would have no authority over, or you are appealing to a universal moral code which would have to have been put there by someone.
Yeah, it's the former, as is the case with every human moral judgment. A person's morality is just their views on what's moral. If you think when you make a moral judgment that's based on anything but your personal views, you're wrong. And that's true even if your personal view is the moral thing is whatever God said in the Bible. Just because the Bible says it, hell, even if God told you himself, even if God reached inside your brain and forced you to believe it, it's still your personal view, the view contained within your brain that what God says is right. You really can't escape the fact that the only thing you can base moral judgments on are your personal moral views, whether you think they're based on some objective morality or not. Now, as for whether I have authority over God, that's irrelevant completely. Let's say I have a moral objection to something about President Donald Trump. Is my opinion invalidated by the fact that I have no authority over him? No, it's still my opinion, and it's the same with your God. I don't care if I have authority over it, or frankly if it even exists. When some person tells me a characteristic they think it has, and that characteristic goes against every moral idea I hold, I condemn it. Oh, and by the way, why would a universal moral code held by every human being have to be put there by someone? Can you honestly think of no reason people might share an opinion other than a supernatural entity stuck it in their head?
You've painted yourself into a morality corner where nearly every position you took in this video is logically flawed. The arguments against a universal moral code are logically sound in the context of no God.
They would be logically sound in the context of a God, too. Just because there's a God doesn't mean that God made a moral code. It also doesn't mean that God stuck the moral code in every single person's brain, or weaved it into the fabric of the universe, or whatever.
But in the context of an omniscient God, that also means he would have his own views, and he's omniscient, and your views are of no concern, and he wouldn't be subject to your judgment.
As I said before, the universal moral code that you're talking about is not actually universal. It's the opinion of one entity, God. Other entities still hold different moral opinions than he does. But sure, maybe God's morality is the one morality everyone will ultimately be accountable to. It's possible, and yet, despite that, humans can and do still have their own opinions. You say that because God is omniscient, the views of humans are of no concern to him and he wouldn't be subject to their judgment. And you're right, he can't be held accountable to the morality of any person, even if he exists, only because he's much too strong to oppose. In which case, so what? That doesn't make him moral, it just means if a human disapproves of his actions, there's nothing they can do about it. But it sounds like what you're really saying is just that might makes right, just like the guy in the video who thinks anything God does is okay because he's stronger than everyone else. I fail to see any significant difference between the two of you, and you might want to take a minute to think about that. But there's something funny about what you said, and I have to set it up a little bit before I actually tell you what it is. So, the real problem people have with moral relativism is that a certain kind of moral relativist might say something like, "That's just a different culture, my views are of no concern, they're not subject to my judgment, so I shouldn't judge them." And in my opinion, this is an idiotic way to do things, because it misses what I consider to be the whole point of even having a moral code. A moral code is a tool, or a framework, or whatever you want to call it, by which you can judge actions and statements. And if a white Canadian or a brown Pakistani holds a slave, I fail to see any moral difference. There's still a person in slavery because someone else thought it was okay to keep them there. I'm not a fan of double standards when it comes to people's well-being. And I see no reason to avoid judgment of someone over something as meaningless as their culture if your morality is defined based on the way actions impact individuals, or in other words, based on concern for the well-being of your fellow human. You absolutely can judge anyone from any culture based on your own morality, and if you want your morality to be useful in increasing the well-being of the individual, I think you probably should. And that being the case, I would propose that if you're not using your moral code to judge the actions and statements of everyone, regardless of their culture, then I would argue that you've made your moral code considerably less useful, since then it fails to apply to most people on the planet, and it could actually end up being destructive, since you would then lack the will to condemn actions which you would instantly see as hugely immoral if they were done by someone like you. And that's why I feel the need to judge everyone based on my own morality, regardless of who they are, where they're from, how they were raised. I don't care about any of that. And so, for example, since it's my opinion that the slavery of humans is very bad for individual humans, and there's no circumstance which makes slavery necessary for the greater good, I find slavery absolutely unacceptable in principle. Doesn't matter who does it, doesn't matter how they attempt to justify it. God or human, if you think you own a person and you can do any violent thing you want to them against their will, then your action is incompatible with my moral code and I condemn it. I don't care if you're too strong for me to stop you or not. I'll still judge you. But I mentioned there was something funny about what you said. You said,
"But in the context of an omniscient God, that also means he would also have his own views, and he's omniscient, and your views are of no concern, and he wouldn't be subject to your judgment."
So here you've basically told me that because the God described in the video we're discussing just has different views on morality than I do, then my views are irrelevant, he's not subject to my judgment, and I shouldn't judge him. Which makes you exactly the same kind of moral relativist that I just described. The only difference is that your double standard is based on who's a deity and who's not, instead of, for example, who's a Muslim and who's not.
Rejecting what this guy is saying because you personally don't like it and don't agree with it is fine.
According to your personal moral code, anyway. According to his, not so much, I bet. Obviously, I reject his completely and prefer yours, but I still acknowledge that his exists.
But your name is Logicked. I kind of assumed you would logically debunk the concept/idea of humans being slaves to an omniscient God.
Well, you know what they say. When you assume, you make an ass of you and me. Not every video on my channel is a rigorous debunk, but you'll find plenty of those if you want to. Look for the ones arguing about God's existence. Those ones debunk the claim that you want debunked. If there's no God, there are no slaves to God. But unfortunately, there are still plenty of people who think there is a God, and who think that people are slaves to it, and that that's A-okay. And sometimes you just have to make a video exposing that rot.
This video had far more morality and emotion expressed than logic.
Yeah, obviously. My audience does not require a long-winded explanation of why the concept of slavery is bad. Most of us already have that figured out. You know, sometimes it's okay to just give a big fucking middle finger to the anti-human mentality of the religious. So, thoughts? This is a bit of a tricky concept to talk about, especially when you're not quite sure what the person you're arguing with wanted to say. Do you think I have something wrong? Leave a comment, correct me. Even if I don't argue with you, somebody probably will. And subscribe and thumb up the video if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time.